90 days previous to the 5th of April, 1849, had anyone told me that I should be a traveler upon the wild wastes between the Missouri River and the Pacific Ocean, I would have looked upon it as an idle jest. But circumstances, which frequently govern the course of men in the journey of life, were brought to bear upon me, and on that day I became a nomad denizen of the world, and a new and important era of my life began. My constitution had suffered sad inroads by disease incident to Western climate, and my physician frankly told me that a change of residence and more bodily exertion was absolutely necessary to effect any improvement in my physical state. He emphasized that indeed my continued sojourn upon this earth relied upon such a drastic measure. About this time the astonishing accounts of the vast deposits of gold in California reached me, and besides the fever of the body, I was suddenly seized with the fever of mind for gold. In hopes of receiving a speedy cure for the ills, both of body and mind, I turned my attention westward ho, and immediately commenced making arrangements for my departure. On the day first named, I bid adieu to my family and to Ottawa, and proceeded to St. Louis on the steamer Revolution. There was a great crowd of adventurers on the embassy. Nearly every state in the Union was represented. Every berth was full, and not only every settee and table occupied at night, but the cabin floor was covered by the sleeping emigrants. The decks were covered with wagons, mules, oxen, and mining implements, and the hold was filled with supplies. But this was the condition of every boat, for since the invasion of Rome by the Goths, such a deluge of mortals had not been witnessed, as was now pouring from the States to the various points of departure for the golden shores of California. Visions of sudden and immense wealth were dancing in the imaginations of these anxious seekers of fortunes, and I must confess that I was not entirely free from such dreams. Their first day out was spent in these pleasing reflections, and the song and the jest went round with glee, while the toil, the dangers, and the hardships yet to come were not thought of, for they were not yet understood. But they were understood soon enough. On the second day, amid the gaieties of their motley crowd, a voice was heard, which at once checked the sound of mirth and struck with alarm the stoutest heart. "The cholera is on board." For a moment all voices were hushed. Each looked in another's face in mute inquiry, expecting perhaps to see a victim in my neighbor. It was a melancholy spectacle to see one who had left home with high hopes of success so prematurely stricken down, and although I had no mother near me to soothe my last anguish or weep over my distress, I was surrounded by friends who were ready and willing to yield any assistance to mitigate my pain. Indeed, there was not a man on board whose heart did not yearn to do something for the sufferer. A tedious passage of 10 days brought us passengers to St. Joseph, where we learned that the company which had preceded us had left that day, with the intention of moving up the river to some other point for crossing into the Indian Territory. My cattle had arrived safely and were waiting under the charge of Henderson, about a day's journey in the country. After some preparations, I, along with the other gold seekers, departed with haste. The morning was rainy, but at the hour of starting it held up. The wind blew a gale, and about 4 o'clock it began to rain again, and we encamped. Our tents were pitched on low ground. Deep ditches were dug around, and we thought ourselves secure from the storm. But the rain came constantly in torrents. The spray beat into their tents as it never had done before, so that we had but a poor protection from the wet, while the cold, chilling wind blew a hurricane without. and promised them no very comfortable night. As we were about making up our minds to pass the night without water and grass for our cattle, while ascending a slight elevation, a broad meadow, 2 or 3 miles in extent, lay before us, in which was a fine pond. The men went cheerily to work, and during the afternoon a good bridge was built, the steep banks dug down, and a good place for crossing was made. The scenery continued much the same as we drove about 16 miles that day, with no incident of particular note. However, our spirits were lifted by the prospect of a capital breakfast, a welcome change from our ordinary fare. It's curious how men's appetites can grow aristocratic on the plains, where one might expect them to become less discerning. Yet for once we felt disposed to indulge in this anti-plebeian taste. A raccoon had been killed on the previous day, and an ample share was divided among our mess. The meat, though tough, was a delightful departure from the monotony of salt pork and hardtack. As we gathered around the cooking fire that morning, the aroma of roasting raccoon filled the air, mingling with the scent of strong coffee. The men's faces, weathered and tired from weeks on the trail, brightened with anticipation. We swapped stories of home and shared our hopes for the gold fields that lay ahead. For a brief moment the hardships of our journey were forgotten in the simple pleasure of a hot meal and good company. The morning was still bitterly cold and uncomfortable when we set out again. The wind whipped across the open plain, finding every gap in our clothing and chilling us to the bone. Yet I found myself feeling marginally better, able to sit up a little in the wagon. I dared to hope that I might soon be well enough to walk alongside it again, though the constant jostling and rattling of the wheels over the uneven ground was a forceful reminder of my weakened state. As we crested a low rise, an extraordinary sight broke upon our view. For miles in every direction, an animated mass of humanity stretched across the landscape. Long trains of wagons with their white covers were moving slowly along like great canvas-backed beetles. A multitude of horsemen pranced on the road, their mounts' hooves kicking up dust that hung in the air like a golden haze. Companies of men traveled on foot, their determined strides eating up the miles. Though the scene was not exactly gorgeous, the display of banners fluttering from many wagons and the multitude of armed men gave the impression of a mighty army on the march. It was a stirring sight, and I felt a swelling of pride and excitement to be part of this great westward migration, this pilgrimage to the promised land of California. The bare hills and water-worn rocks on their left began to assume many fantastic shapes, and after raising a gentle elevation, a most extraordinary sight presented itself to their view. A basin-shaped valley, bounded by high rocky hills, lay before them, perhaps 12 miles in length by 6 or 8 broad. The perpendicular sides of the mountains presented the appearance of castles, forts, towers, verandas, and chimneys, with a blending of Asiatic and European architecture, and it required an effort to believe that we were not in the vicinity of some ancient and deserted town. It seemed as if the wand of a magician had passed over a city, and like that in the Arabian Nights had converted all living things into stone. Here we saw the minarets of a castle, there the loopholes of bastions of a fort, again the frescoes of a huge temple. Then the doors, windows, chimneys, and columns of immense buildings appeared in view, with all the solemn grandeur of an ancient yet deserted city. As the journey wore on, the physical toll became evident. Oxen went lame, wagons broke down, and supplies ran low. The emigrants were forced to abandon cherished possessions, lightening their loads ounce by ounce. The trail became littered with discarded furniture, books, and even food. Yet amidst the hardship, there were moments of beauty and wonder. I marveled at the vast herds of buffalo, the strange rock formations like Chimney Rock and Scott's Bluffs, and the camaraderie that developed between strangers thrown together by circumstance. As the miles slowly passed beneath their wagon wheels, the gold seekers were transformed. They left behind the trappings of civilization and became hardened to the ways of the wilderness. Those who survived would never be the same. By the time they reached the eastern slope of the Rocky Mountains, these pioneers had already endured more than they ever thought possible. Yet the greatest challenges still lay ahead: the formidable mountain ranges, scorching deserts, and the final push to the gold fields of California.